The day Karen from the HOA told me to tear down the ugly silo on my land, I laughed right in front of her. Not a polite laugh either, the kind that slips out when your brain needs a second to process pure nonsense. There she stood in the afternoon heat. Floral muumuu tugged tight clipboard, hugged to her chest like a badge pointing across my 10 acres, as if she'd personally inherited the valley. "That thing has to come down, Mr. Callahan, immediately." She said it like she was announcing the weather, like the universe had already signed off on it. I looked past her toward the tall structure rising above the pines at the edge of my property, and I let the silence hang there just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Not because I didn't understand her, because I did. I also knew something she didn't. That tower wasn't some rusty farm relic she could bully into disappearing, but Karen didn't know that yet. And some of the sweetest victories begin with letting the wrong person feel completely sure they're right. I bought that land 20 years ago before Northridge Meadows existed. Back then, the valley was quiet oak trees, dust narrow roads, and hills rolling toward the national forest. No HOA newsletters, no approved color palettes, no little committees deciding what counted as tasteful. I had just retired from the Air Force after 20 years working communications systems, satellites, relay stations, navigation arrays, anything that carried a signal. After that much structure, I wanted the opposite. Peace, space, and a place where nobody told me what to do on my own property. That land gave me exactly that, but the first thing I did after buying it wasn't build the house. It was solve a problem everyone in the valley had been complaining about for years. Cell service out there used to be awful. If you stood on the right hill and held your phone up like an offering to the sky, maybe you got one shaky bar. Otherwise, you were shouting into the void. Missed business calls, missed family calls, missed emergency calls. Everybody hated it. So I called an old contact at OmniLink. They'd been trying to fix the coverage problem for years, but every tower site caused an uproar. My ridge was perfect high-ground tree cover, isolated enough not to offend half the county. We signed a 99-year lease, and they built a relay tower designed to look like an agricultural silo so it would blend into the landscape. And overnight, the dead zone vanished. People could call for help. Businesses could function. Families could stay connected. OmniLink paid me a healthy lease every year, ran fiber to my house, and for 15 years that tower stood quietly above the trees, carrying signals across the valley. Nobody complained. Then the developers arrived. They bought the surrounding ranch land, chopped it into suburban squares, and built 100 houses that all looked like variations of the same thought. Then came the lawns, the matching mailboxes, and naturally the HOA. And with the HOA came Karen. Karen had lived there maybe 2 years when she complained her way onto the board. Within months, she was president. After that, she treated the neighborhood like her own little kingdom. Trash cans out too long, fine. Front door the wrong shade of white, fine. Wind chime too loud, flower pots too colorful, mailbox not approved, fine, fine, fine. I mostly stayed outside her orbit. My property sat beyond the subdivision and had been there decades longer than any of those houses. But power like Karen's never stays satisfied. Eventually, it goes looking for a new target, and one afternoon it found my tower. She handed me an envelope thick enough to bruise. Inside was a formal notice $10,000 fine, plus $500 a day until my unapproved industrial structure was removed. The letter was full of bold type and legal threats, the bureaucratic version of pounding your fists on a table. I read it once, set it on my workbench, and went back to fixing a fence post. Karen took that as fear. A week later, another letter came. Bigger fines, more threats. Then she posted a giant laminated violation notice at the entrance to the subdivision naming my property like I was some public hazard. That was when I realized she didn't just want control, she wanted an audience. So I started walking through Northridge Meadows in the evenings, not to argue, just to listen. And what I found surprised me. The Hendersons had been fined because their bird bath was the wrong color. The Garcia family had been forced to repaint their kids' swing set because bright blue wasn't on the approved earth tone list. Marcus, a retired Marine, had been fighting Karen for weeks because his flagpole was 2 inches taller than HOA regulations allowed. Every house had a story, petty notices, random fines, smug letters, condescending warnings. But the real trick was that every family thought they were alone. That's how Karen stayed powerful. Isolation. So we changed that. A few nights later, several of us met at my house. Just coffee folding chairs, a whiteboard, and a room full of people tired of being pushed around. We started writing everything down. Dates, fines, letters, violations. Then Marcus asked the question that changed the whole thing. Where does all that money go? He was right. HOA fines don't disappear. They go somewhere. So we formally requested the association's financial records. What came back looked wrong right away: blacked out line items, missing pages, strange transfers accounts that didn't line up. To most people, it might have looked like sloppy bookkeeping. To me, it looked like a warning light. We started digging. Within an hour, we found the first crack. The HOA's landscaping company, Lush Greenscapes LLC, had been registered 18 months earlier. Owner Karen's brother-in-law. That changed everything. The contracts were inflated, the work was mediocre, and the money trail suddenly looked less like incompetence and more like a family business wearing a neighborhood badge. My tower wasn't the real issue anymore. Karen had just picked the wrong fight and pointed us towards something bigger. I called an attorney friend of mine, Sarah Jenkins. She reviewed the documents at my kitchen table, then looked up and said, "Jack, this isn't a neighborhood squabble. This is the beginning of a criminal investigation." Sarah's advice was simple: let Karen escalate. Let her call a public meeting. Let her drag me into the spotlight thinking she was about to humiliate me. Then we show everybody what she'd really been building behind the scenes. 2 weeks later, Karen did exactly that. She called a special emergency HOA meeting at the community center. She opened with a speech about harmony standards and responsible leadership, the kind of speech that sounds noble, right up until you realize it's being used to justify nonsense. Then she pointed at me and announced that I was refusing to comply with HOA rules, so the board would vote to sue me and force removal of my tower. I stood up, asked for a few minutes to speak, and for once she agreed, probably because she thought I was there to surrender. I rolled a projector cart forward and connected my laptop. First slide, a map of the valley marked cellular dead zone. Second slide, the tower. Third slide, the OmniLink lease. Then I said, real calm, this structure you've all been told is an ugly eyesore is the reason most of you can make a phone call from inside your homes. The room went still. Karen's smile slipped. I showed the federal communications paperwork. I explained the emergency coverage radius. I showed them the protected lease agreement, then the financial records, then the company registration, linking the landscaping contract to Karen's family. That was the first twist. The second one hit harder. I pulled out my phone and called the OmniLink Network Operations Center, gave them my authorization code, and requested a 30-second diagnostic shutdown of Tower 734. 5 seconds later, the tower went offline. All around the room, phones dropped signal. People looked at their screens, frowned, raised their phones in the air like altitude might help. One man muttered, "No service." A woman near the back said her medical monitoring app had disconnected. That silence was the moment everything changed. I looked straight at Karen and said very quietly, "This is what your HOA president wanted torn down." Then the room exploded. The anger came fast and loud. Not at me, at her. Marcus got to his feet and called for a vote of no confidence right there on the spot. Hands shot up all over the room. Karen tried to talk over everyone, tried to claim misinformation, but by then it was over. The spell had broken. Her board collapsed that night. And once the forensic audit started, the rest of her little empire came apart in chunks. Inflated contracts, personal expenses on HOA cards, fine money, routed into hidden accounts, payments disguised as maintenance. Criminal charges came soon after. Karen ended up selling her house to cover legal fees and restitution, which, considering how obsessed she'd been with property values, felt almost poetic. After that, Northridge Meadows changed fast. The ridiculous rules vanished. Kids got their bright blue swing set back. The Hendersons installed the loudest, gaudiest bird bath I've ever seen in my life. Marcus kept his flagpole exactly where it was. And my so-called ugly silo still stands on the ridge, doing what it's always done, carrying calls, messages, and emergency signals. Every now and then I look up at it and think about what that whole mess taught me. Real abuse of power rarely starts with something dramatic. It starts small, a fine, a warning, a petty rule, a smug little demand everybody is tempted to ignore because it seems easier than fighting. That's how people like Karen grow dangerous. They count on decent folks being too busy, too isolated, or too polite to push back. Karen tried to tear down my tower because she thought it was ugly. In the end, the only thing that collapsed was the little kingdom she built out of intimidation paperwork and other people's silence. So let me ask you this. If somebody like Karen started taking over your neighborhood, your street, your corner of the world, would you challenge them the first time they crossed the line? Or stay quiet and hope they never pointed at you next? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a power-hungry neighbor, or somebody who mistook authority for ownership, tell me your story. Where do you draw the line between order and control? And do you think karma really counts as justice when the law finally catches up?